The easy way is, well, easy. And that makes it pretty easy to choose the easy way. And that's not necessarily bad. I mean, who wants to do things the hardest way? Not me. But what I've learned over time is that the easiest way isn't necessarily the best way. The easy fix is one that often doesn't quite last. Sometimes it even makes things worse than it was to begin with. The joke around my house sometimes is that I got to call the professional to fix the things that I tried to fix the easiest and the quickest way first, which means that sometimes the easiest way also ends up making a bigger mess and costing me more than if I just made a different choice. Not always, but sometimes. And I think I've learned that to apply that lesson also to my life choices and my faith choices. The easy way isn't always the best way. Sometimes it's not even the right way. And if that's the case, then the easy way ends up making a bigger mess in my life than I started with. So for me, here's the question, the one that we're going to get into today. When faced with a choice of whether do I take the easy way or not, how do you know if the easy way is best? And how do you know if the easy way, more importantly, is right? We're going to look at some examples from this part of Abraham's story, chapter 19 to 21 of Genesis, and look at how some of those people in Abraham's story chose the easy way and how it didn't exactly work out, and how we can learn some things from their example about guiding us in our own life and faith choices. All right, so example number one is Lot. Now we got to go back in the story to chapter 13 to get a little background here. In Genesis chapter 13, there's a conflict between Abraham and Lot. It seems as if both their herds had grown so big that being on the same land was problematic. It was hard to support both their herds. And so Abraham gave Lot the choice. And Lot looks around and he sees the land that they're on and sees that it's kind of rocky and hilly and hard to work and not so well watered. And then he looks down and he sees the land around Sodom, and he sees that it's flat and level and well watered. Certainly the easiest land to work. Certainly looks like it was the best. And that's the choice Lot made. Didn't work out so well, did it? I mean, if you've been following along with me in Abraham's story, you turn to chapter 14, and after Lot had moved in at Sodom, Sodom's gets involved in a war, and Lot's taken captive, and Abraham goes off to rescue Lot. But then when he rescues Lot, instead of making peace with Abraham and going back and living with him, Lot goes right back to where he was living before, right back in Sodom. Easiest thing to do, right? Easiest thing to stay where you were, pick up life right where you left off, even though there had to be at this point some warning signs for Lot that maybe this wasn't the best thing for him anymore, and maybe not the right thing if it ever was. You see, Sodom, for the most part, people who lived in and around Sodom, they didn't believe in God, and they had no use for God's ways. They lived for themselves. They lived for pleasure. They don't seem to care who they hurt in the process. Not a really good place for a believer and a righteous person. Not really an easy place to be a believer or a righteous person. Now, nothing said in Abraham's story about what Lot's life in Sodom was like, but it's not too hard to imagine Lot being sort of influenced by at least some of what was going on around him, right? And slowly, but inevitably, Lot becoming okay with compromising what he knows is right, either for the sake of getting along or just because that's the way things are done here. And however you imagine it, the bottom line is this, that Lot was slowly, gradually, relentlessly, inevitably pulled into Sodom's orbit. And once he was there, he found it pretty hard to break free. And notice the progression of the move there. Lot starts out, chapter 13, verse 5. Lot's moving around with Abraham, and it's one big happy clan. A couple verses later, verse 8, Lot's quarreling with Abraham. There starts to be some tension there. And that quarreling leads Lot to be looking around, and in verse 10, 2 verses later, it reports that Lot is looking towards Zoar. He's saying, you know what, maybe there's something else, something beyond what I've grown up with, something beyond the values that I've had. They've been a little constricting, constraining, they're cramping my style. It'd be nice to live a little bit. And from that looking toward Zoar in that land, a couple verses later, verse 12, Lot is tenting near Sodom. Now he can still pick up and move, but he's getting closer and closer to Sodom. And then one chapter later, chapter 14, verse 12, you see that Lot is living in Sodom. And now he's putting down roots. Now again, Lot didn't start out in Sodom. He doesn't move directly to Sodom either, but gradually, over time, Lot ended up being pretty entrenched there. The closer to Sodom that Lot gets, the easier the move to Sodom becomes. And the easier and easier it is for Lot to put down roots there, and the harder and harder it is for Lot to break away. I mean, it's just the easy thing to do. But Lot's life in Sodom didn't work out the way that he wanted it to, did it? I mean, you turn to chapter 19, where Abram's story begins today, and you read the sad end to this let's take the easy way decision. I mean, chapter 19, everything that Lot built there in Sodom was destroyed. When God rained down fire and brimstone on that city, the easy way isn't always the best way, is it? Sometimes it's not even the right way, which is typical even today. I mean, looking at the story of Lot, I see the same thing in a lot of believers today. Most believers don't get caught up in messy and questionable stuff immediately. Generally, it's gradual until the gradual becomes normal. And so normal that you don't even say things anymore like, well, everybody else is doing it. I mean, or it's just the way things are around you, and so you become caught up in it too. So let's make some connections here between Lot and our lives today. As you think about how Lot was pulled slowly and gradually into Sodom's orbit, stop and think kind of about your own choices in life. Where have you been gradually pulled out of what's safe and seduced by the culture around you? And where are you tempted to compromise what you know is right for fitting in or getting along? And most importantly, I think, as you think about that, what can you do about that? So here's the second example. We're going to turn to chapter 20, and find Abraham and Abimelech. Now, Abraham's on the move again. He's in the area called the Negev, and just like when he went down to Egypt earlier in the story, Abraham's scared for his own safety. And he's scared for his safety because of how desirable he thinks his wife Sarah is going to be to the people around there, and he's worried that they're going to hurt him to get to her. So Abraham tells his wife, he says, Sarah, tell them that you're my sister. Right, now that was the safest and, from Abraham's perspective, the easiest course of action. And while Abraham knew that God really wasn't happy with his decision to pull the same stunt years before in Egypt, he didn't learn from his mistake. And repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results is kind of foolish, isn't it? But we do it all the time. It's way easier than changing our ways. But is it better? I mean, I'm kind of wondering here if Abraham did some mental gymnastics. You call them rationalizations, okay? If he did these mental gymnastics to talk himself into doing what he did, I can almost imagine these kind of internal conversation going something like this. Oh, yeah, I know it feels kind of wrong. Maybe it even is kind of wrong, but, last time it didn't end up being too bad. I even kind of made out in the deal, and I think God would kind of understand. In fact, maybe this is God's way of protecting me, of keeping me safe. He knows I'm afraid, so let's just try it again. Bad choice. Again, in this case, the easiest way wasn't the best way. And it wasn't the right way. And when he's caught in the mess, Abraham tries to excuse himself with Abimelech. He says, hey, I didn't really lie. She actually is my sister, my half-sister. She just also happens to be my wife. Well, that excuse doesn't really work, does it? I mean, you can bank on these truths, not just here for Abraham, but in your own life. A half-truth is a whole lie. All right, a half-truth is a whole lie. And if you have to explain why something is right or convince yourself that something's right, probably isn't. And learning from your mistakes is a much better course of action than repeating them. All right, those are truths that you can bank on. And again, let's try to make some connections here and learn from this, because it's a lot better if you let Abraham pay what I call the dumb tax rather than paying it yourself. So as you think about this part of Abraham's story, think about this in your own life. Where do you find yourself tending to repeat your own mistakes? Where do you find yourself repeating your own mistakes, and what steps could you take to break the pattern? So the third example here is Sarah and Hagar. Page forward one more chapter to chapter 21. And in chapter 21, what you find out is Sarah has her baby at 90 years old. I mean, talk about being blessed. After all these years, after 25 years of waiting on God's promise to come true, and Sarah's understandably excited. I mean, she is so excited, and her earlier mocking laughter of God has turned into this belly laugh of joy. In fact, this might be the happiest that Sarah's ever been in her entire life. She's been graced with this child of the promise. But then Sarah, who's been so graced, ends up becoming rather ungracious. Now, when Isaac becomes a little toddler, Ishmael who's much older, and Abraham's son by Sarah, he starts making fun of Isaac. And now I'm not sure what it was. The narrator doesn't tell us. He leaves us fill in the blanks on our own. But, I mean, you can imagine as well as I can that it was probably pretty nasty stuff. And does Sarah try to work this through? Nope. Let me read it to you. Genesis chapter 21, starting at verse 8. The child grew and was weaned. On the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a big feast. Sarah saw that Abraham's son by Hagar, the Egyptian, was laughing at Isaac. She said to Abraham, "Get rid of this slave and her son, because this slave's son must never share the inheritance with my son Isaac." And you read on and you find there's no grace applied here at all. I mean, because grace is hard. Lashing out, that's easy. And Sarah probably also had some long-held resentments here against both Hagar and Ishmael, and they'd probably been stewing there for some time. So what you see here is Mama Bear coming out. And Mama Bear comes out, and Sarah drives Hagar and Ishmael away. I mean, because meanness for meanness, well, that's the easiest way. And in Sarah's mind, that's probably also the easiest way to protect her son and herself and her son's inheritance. Now, after all this time and all she'd seen, you'd think that Sarah could have figured out that God could have protected the child of the promise, and that she could have tried to work through and figure out how to way to be gracious. But no, sometimes, well, harshness is easier. It's way easier than working through past resentments and hurt feelings. Way easier to hold on than to let go. Way easier to lash out than to do the hard and often painstaking work of forgiveness. So Hagar and Ishmael get kicked out of camp and have to make do in the desert. And the relationship between these two parts of the families, it's been at odds ever since, all the way to this present day. Again, did easier end up being better? No, just ended up being messier. And again, let's take a moment to connect the dots and learn from this. Just take a moment to think about those. When is it easier for you to be harsh with someone in your life? When was it easier for you to be harsh with someone in your life, and why was that? And then think about, what did that do to the relationship? So as we think about those three examples, Lot, Abraham, Sarah and Hagar, is the easy way the best way? Is the easy way always the best way or the right way? I mean, it can be. But as we've seen in these examples, often it isn't. In fact, often the easy way just ends up being, well, messier. So here's the question: how do you tell? How do you tell if the easy way is the right way or not? I mean, how can you avoid making a dumb choice? And what can you do if you thought the easy way was okay, and then you discover you made a bad choice after all? So first question first, how do you tell? How do you tell what's the easy way, if the easy way is the right way or not? Well, number one, spend a little more time looking before leaping. Spend a little more time looking before leaping. A little more time thinking before doing. A little more time evaluating before acting. And to do that, to to look before you leap, ask yourself these 3 questions. What does God say? What does your gut say? And what's the gracious thing to do? All right, start with, what does God say? I mean, is there a clear word of God on this choice here? I mean, in the examples that we looked at today, there certainly is clear Bible on things like don't mess with your marriage, and don't be harsh, be kind and gentle, and keep on following God's will and God's ways and God's path. Don't compromise that. So there's clear word of God on that. So if there's clear word of God, then listen to it. What does God say? Second question, what does your gut say? Well, I mean, again, if it feels off, it probably is. And if you're having to convince yourself that what you're thinking of doing is the right course to follow, then it's probably a wrong one. See, God put conscience in each and every one of us. And He put that conscience there to guide us so that we can make choices that are in line with His will. So listen to your conscience instead of ignoring it or trying to explain why in this case it doesn't apply. Guys, conscience doesn't have an expiration date. So what does God say? What does your conscience, what does your gut say? And what's the gracious thing to do? I mean, that's important too. We've seen that over and over again in Abraham's story. We're starting to learn that the heart of God's heart is grace. So the gracious thing to do, the gracious way to act, is probably the godly way to act. Use those 3 questions to help you, again, look before leaping. And then number 2, well, learn from the past. Right? You can learn from the past, learn from others, including these Bible people that we've looked at today. It's a lot easier to let them pay what I call the dumb tax than to pay it yourself. And then also learn from your own mistakes. Learn from your own life. Learn from your mistakes so that you don't repeat them. I mean, don't keep paying the dumb tax yourself if you don't have to. I mean, doing something once or twice is a mistake, but doing it over and over and over again and expecting different results, that's foolish. And it just leads to all sorts of the messes. So again, look before you start leaping, and then learn from the past. Now, that's how to help on the front end. But what if on the back end you've thought, oh, the easier way was better, and you find out it wasn't? What do you do if you've made a bad choice? Well, first of all, understand, God won't let His promises be undone by your bad choices. Right? Understand that God offers you forgiveness freely every time that you ask. Understand that God's always been like that, and God always will be, because Jesus came and He died and He rose to make that a rock-solid, incontrovertible fact. And then from the basis of that understanding, well, trust yourself to God's grace. Trust yourself to God's grace. I mean, remember, God rescued Lot, even though he didn't deserve it. And God forgave Abraham, even though he didn't deserve it, and obviously he hadn't learned from his past mistakes. And God didn't take Sarah's blessing away just because she was really mean. I mean, God is gracious and loving and forgiving where we're not. Lot and Abraham and Sarah, they all chose the easy way, thinking that it was best. And even though God would have wanted them to make a better choice, a different choice, God didn't hold it against them. God forgave them. And He's done the same for me. He'll do the same for you. And leaning into that, Leaning into that not only helps you start fresh, leaning into that not only helps you make better choices, leaning into that helps your faith and obedience grow. And isn't that what you and God both want?